Today I've got one of the nicest looking laptops out there, the Razer Blade 15. It's no doubt that this thing is like the MacBook of Windows laptops. I've always loved the Razer Blade because of the design, and I've always rooted for Razer and hoped that they would continue to improve their products. They have a lot of faults, but I'll admit I have noticed them improving their Blade laptops a decent amount each year, and I respect that. I know I'm super late because this is the 2022 model, but I am super respectful that on the new 2023 models, they actually increased the size of the chassis a little bit to give you full power GPUs, which is something that was not possible before. So that's great to see, but they are still making the Blade 15 for 2023, and it's not too much different than this one right here. So this one here is the Intel 12800H processor model. It has a massive 14 cores and 20 threads, 8 of those cores being efficiency cores, while the other 6 are performance cores. It can hit about 65 watts sustained, which is a little low, but it still performs well. And for the GPU, it has the RTX 3080 Ti, but it's a lower wattage one again that runs up to 110 watts, which is, I believe, 5 more watts than the 2021 models. So in no way should you expect this to beat out a 175 watt monster like the Asus Scar 17 or the Lenovo Legion 7 or something like that. It's crazy to me though that the 2023 models have the full wattage GPUs with just a slightly thicker chassis though. So I'm not gonna lie, for most people, this 3080 Ti is just not necessary. You can get about the same level of performance from the 3070 Ti, but I just like seeing what the best these companies can offer is. So this also gives people a good idea of the value they're getting even from lower tiers. So like you can save over $1,000 by just going with the RTX 3060 version of this laptop. Will you lose out on some performance? Yeah, but maybe it checks enough of the other boxes that you want so that you don't really mind it. And I'll at least give an estimate of what you'd be looking at with those lower tier GPU options here. So first off, the design on this thing, in my opinion, is like the ideal design of a laptop. It's sleek, it's CNC aluminum, it's like a MacBook that went to the dark side. Some people find the light up snakes to be a little much, but I kind of like it. The black metal body just feels so insanely sturdy, but it's not perfect. The edges of your Razer Blade will almost certainly get paint chipped and reveal a lovely shiny little silver shimmer that just reminds you every single day that your laptop is no longer perfect. I've tested 4 Razer Blades and this still happened to me on 2 of them, even though I'm pretty careful with these things. That and I always get dust or a random crumb stuck in the speaker grill. My last and worst pet peeve though is the fingerprints. They claim to have a fingerprint resistant coating here, but it's just simply not doing the job well enough. This thing is an absolute fingerprint magnet. If you want it to look pristine, you're gonna have to wipe it down every day and after every use probably. And don't forget the razor sharp edges, which will inevitably leave marks on your arm after a long gaming session. But onto some other goodies with the design. So you've got some of the best per key RGB lighting on any laptop. The effects are just so smooth and there's a ton of brightness levels to adjust. The keyboard also feels really nice. Some people don't like the more shallow travel distance, but I think it feels really nice. It's a little clicky and sort of feels like current MacBooks. I also love a centered keyboard and big trackpad, so here's how it sounds compared to the Flow X16 and the Asus Zephyrus G15 just for reference. And the glass trackpad is huge and feels super smooth, maybe even better than the Asus Zephyrus ones. So here's how it sounds in comparison to those. You also get a 1080p webcam and it works and looks pretty good. Especially nice that it works with Windows Hello to sign you in. The hinges are also good. One of the better feeling sturdy hinges out there compared to most other gaming laptops. And the power adapter is also fairly small, so not too bad there. Much smaller than like Lenovo Legion laptops or Alienware laptops, power bricks, which are huge in comparison. So yeah, it's a thin and light design and doesn't look too far off from like a Dell XPS 15 or a Precision chassis here. And it's a little smaller than the Asus ROG Flow X16 with the 16-inch display. So overall, like I said, I think Razer has one of the most ideal laptop designs, and I really wish others would follow, at a cheaper price. But for now, it's unfortunately one of a kind. So as for ports, on the right side, we've got a USB-A 3.2 port and a USB-C Thunderbolt 4 port, HDMI 2.1, Kensington lock, and a full-size SD card reader, which is really nice to have. Although the card will stick out a little bit and the read-write speeds are just average. On the left side, we have two more USB 3.2 ports and another USB-C port. You can charge the laptop, I believe, up to 100 watts through either USB-C port. And of course, your headphone jack and the odd proprietary power connection that Razer has. So internally, you've got two DDR5 RAM slots. Both are upgradable, which is great. Each stick of DDR5 runs in dual channel. So in this one, you've got two 16 gigabyte sticks for a total of 32 gigabytes in quad channel. Here's the RAM benchmarks to show the RAM speeds, which are pretty on par with most 2022 DDR5 laptops. And the included 1 terabyte M.2 SSD is in here, which shows pretty great Gen 4 speeds. You also get a vapor chamber here, which is pretty necessary in a chassis this thin for helping keep everything cool. And of course, your 90 watt hour battery, which is replenished pretty quickly thanks to the Intel CPU. So moving over to the software here, we have Razer Synapse. It's one of the most simple and easy to use command centers, I think, out there. Sure, it doesn't give you quite as much customizability as Armory Crate, but pretty simple to use. Got lots of options for keyboard lighting. You've got gaming mode here, which doesn't really do anything for performance. Function key controls, brightness controls. You can control the lighting of the logo on the lid. And of course, your performance profiles. Quickly to go through those. Balanced allows you to adjust your target fan speeds, which is nice, but I would like to see them offer real fan curves, sort of like the ROG laptops that have Armory Crate. You've also got a silent profile, which I believe is new on the 2022 model. It cuts back quite a bit of performance, but it offers the lowest fan noise possible. And then custom mode, which allows you to get the most performance out of this laptop that you can get. Custom mode lets you set the GPU and CPU to desired levels of performance, but there's no fan control in this setting. Also, Advanced Optimus can be found here where you can manually or automatically have the laptop turn off NVIDIA Optimus, which will allow your display to run straight through the NVIDIA graphics rather than having it communicate with the Intel integrated graphics. So basically what this does is it runs games directly through the DGPU, your RTX 3080 Ti, which allows for more performance. So it's nice that they have this because normally a mux switch like this requires a restart. So it's nice that this one doesn't. Not many 2022 laptops have Advanced Optimus, but it seems like most of the 2023 ones out there do. So, and then everything else in this software is just little gimmicky things like Game Booster and System Cleaner, which kind of attempt to clean up background processes. I've never really noticed any difference when using those settings though, but they're there. And in the BIOS, you've got very basic settings, which I'll just scrub through really quickly here, but nothing that allows for insane tweaking like that of MSI laptops. So moving on to the display, I always say that QHD is the sweet spot for 15-inch laptops. And this 240Hz QHD display looks great. Yes, it's not the OLED model, but it's still super fast and you've got colors that are vibrant and accurate. My only complaint is that it's not the brightest out there and it is outshined by other displays like the Flow X16, but it's plenty bright enough for most use cases and just don't let the sun shine directly on it or anything. As you can see in this clip, the mini LED display like the Flow just makes the camera have trouble even compensating for the brightness, so just for comparison there. But thankfully, the 2023 models of the Razer in the new 16-inch chassis have a few models with mini LED displays now, so if you decide you want to go that route, it is possible. As for the speakers, with a laptop that looks like a MacBook, you would expect that maybe it might sound like a MacBook too, but that is not the case here. It's a very tinny sounding speakers and they get absolutely blown away by like Asus, and even the Blade 17 is just a much different story, has much better speakers than this one and decent bass response. So here's some clips comparing it to the Asus laptops that I mentioned, which I would argue have some of the best sounding gaming laptop speakers, at least in 2022 when this was recorded. All right, moving on to CPU performance. So as far as CPU goes, this is a 12th gen Intel processor, so it's going to do great. I mean, the only thing holding it back, of course, is that it doesn't hit as high of wattages as the big boys, but you're looking at a Cinebench score of around 13,000, 14,000, and much better short-term performance when you do a single run, hitting closer to 15,000. So, I mean, this is around the same level as like the AMD Ryzen 9 6900HS or a well-tuned AMD 5900HX. So it's still not the best when compared to other thin and lights, but it is very acceptable. And here's Geekbench scores for those who want to see that. So to move on to some creator benchmarks here, let's look at music. So I have Ableton Live here, and I'm running the demo track to see how much CPU load it causes, as that's a pretty good indicator of how it's going to perform when you've got multiple tracks and effects going. So it hits about 20 to 22% in the heaviest part of this track, which is great compared to the ROG Flow X16, which hits about 28% here. So that shows that the Intel processor is helping a bit in music production, even though both are obviously still performing really well. Latency mon was not looking great here, thanks to NVIDIA, which is pretty average when looking at pretty much every 2022 laptop. You can improve things a little bit by making sure you're in hybrid mode though. For Adobe Photoshop, we're getting a Puget score of 1149, which for comparison to the Flow X16 with a 3070 Ti and 6900HS, that's about 60 points higher. For Adobe Premiere Pro, we're getting a score of 1089, which again, comparing to the Flow X16 is about 300 points higher. So Premiere Pro is definitely seeing a benefit from the Intel CPU here. Overall, this is a great machine though for creators, unless maybe you're on battery often, and we'll discuss that here in a second. So yeah, doing things on battery, this is where Intel laptops tend to struggle since they don't usually have the same level of efficiency and get outperformed by AMD at lower wattages. For example, the Blade 15 scored 9,700 points in Cinebench on battery, which isn't bad, but it is a couple thousand points lower than the Flow X16 on battery. And looking at our Puget scores, our Adobe Premiere Pro score drops over half from 1089 to 442 compared to 580 on the Flow X16. So that's a much bigger hit to performance when you unplug. It's still not bad, it's just Intel does lose a lot when you unplug. Moving on to thermals. So thermals in a chassis this thin and light are never going to be the best, and they're not, but they are acceptable and nothing that I wouldn't expect. In games like Apex Legends here, the CPU jumps from around 80 to 95 degrees, hitting upwards of 98 in small bursts. The GPU tends to stay much cooler though, around 72. Dropping the CPU profile from boost to high doesn't really do very much, but dropping from high to medium does cool the CPU down quite a bit, about 10 degrees it seems, now hitting between like 78 to 85 degrees in Apex. Running in balanced mode is roughly the same though, with the CPU averaging in the low 80s. The keyboard does get a little warm from the metal chassis, but in my experience, I feel like this year's model stays much cooler in the keyboard area than other Blade 15s from previous years. And now battery life. So I wasn't expecting much in the battery department, but I do have to say that I am decently impressed with how Razer managed to squeeze out some okay battery life from the super power hungry 12th gen Intel CPU here. I got about 6.5 hours in my YouTube playback test, which compared to the G15 and X16 is only about an hour less. So it doesn't get as much performance on battery as them, but for an Intel CPU, this is definitely a bit higher than the competition. All right, so the fans are actually one of my favorite parts about the 2022 Blade 15. I've used previous models that had really annoying fans, but they actually tuned them pretty good on this 2022 model. So it almost seems like they prioritized fan noise above all else. Like in the highest performance mode, you're looking at around 50 decibels at head level, which is really quiet compared to many others out there that will typically hit like 56 decibels when you're gaming. So, that doesn't sound like a huge difference, but keep in mind that 56 decibels is like 5 or 6 times as intense of a sound. So what really blew me away was like how quiet balanced and silent mode are. I was playing Apex Legends here and I threw it in balanced mode and I honestly freaked out for a second because I thought I broke something. I expected to hear the fans like maybe a little less than like custom mode, but still going pretty loud, but actually they were so quiet that it almost didn't feel right. I've actually never had that experience playing a game at like max settings and getting pretty good FPS with super low fan noise. So this balanced mode only hits like 39 decibels and can get you a score of around 10,000 in time spy, which is really good like noise to performance ratio. So I would say like this laptop is very acceptable to bring around like a group of friends and not have to worry about people being like, yo, your laptop's about to take off. They also added the silent mode, which works really well. Yes, it does draw back performance quite a bit more, but this would be great for doing some non-intensive tasks or if you're bringing your laptop in the library or something. So in silent mode under heavy load, we hit 36 decibels, which is super quiet, while getting a score of around 7,000 in Cinebench and a graphics score of 9,000 in Time Spy. So that is awesome to see. I honestly can't say more about how impressed I am with the fan tuning here. The only other contender would really be the Asus ROG Flow X16. That one has a 3-fan design and can run games at around the same noise level for the performance, but this one still wins though when gaming in the middle of the road like balanced mode compared to the Flow's performance mode as far as like noise to performance ratio. So overall, great fan tuning from Razer. All right, so the GPU here is an RTX 3080 Ti with 16 gigabytes of VRAM. This is the top performing GPU that NVIDIA has to offer. Obviously, it's cut back a bit by the wattage, but you're still getting that level of VRAM, so that's great for creators and for those who like to push settings to the max in games at high resolutions. But like I said, it is at a lower wattage than the 175 watts that the RTX 3080 Ti is capable of when it's in like thicker gaming laptops like the Lenovo Legion 7 or MSI GE67 or laptops like those. So that doesn't make it a slouch though, but that does make the 3070 Ti version of this laptop a better value. So here's the Time Spy score with performance settings maxed out. That puts it around the same level, just barely above the 125 watt RTX 3070 Ti in my ROG Flow X16. So of course you can overclock the blade a little bit and hit over 11,000 with like a small hit to your CPU score, but overall not bad performance, but it is quite a bit under some of those higher wattage 3070 Ti's, 3080 Ti's, and 3080s from 2021. So a lot of people see GPU scores a bit lower than the competition, and then they automatically think that the laptop is bad, but I disagree with that. I think there's still a lot more to a laptop than how high it can benchmark. Remember, you're getting these scores in a very thin chassis with a bit lower fan noise than the competition too. Does that mean they offer great value? Maybe not. So that's where the 3060 and 3070 Ti models come in, and they're pretty close, you know, so unless you really need that VRAM or you really want that extra 5-10% performance, you know, I would probably go for those models. And lastly, here's Geekbench GPU scores for those who are wondering. All right, so now let's talk gaming performance here. So Shadow of the Tomb Raider is one of my favorite benchmarks. I use it kind of as a standard. The Razer Blade 15 scores about 97 FPS at QHD highest settings, which is just a little ahead of a Legion 7 from last year with 140 watt 3070. A little bit ahead of some of the 3070 Ti's here, and a little bit under, you know, some of the 3080s from last year or higher wattage 3070 Ti's like the Mech 15. Drop it down to 1080p, and now we have the Blade getting about 135 FPS, which, you know, again, is pretty okay. It's around 3070 Ti levels. So still not the greatest, but I mean, it's pretty middle of the road performance. Decent for a chassis this thin. Next, we've got Forza Horizon 5 on the Extreme preset running at QHD. The Blade 15, actually, I threw in Jarrod's text Blade 15 that had an i9 processor, which actually scored just a hair lower than this one, which is kind of funny. And I think that has to do with the CPU not giving the GPU as much headroom with that 12900H. So yeah, I got 76 FPS here, which is actually pretty good on this one. It puts it up there with some of the high wattage 3070 Ti's and 3080s from last year. Drop it down to 1080p and it's still pretty close to the top, 84 FPS. But there wasn't too much differentiation between like 3080s and 3070 Ti's here, except for on some of these MSI laptops. So moving on to control, the Blade 15 with the high preset with ray tracing on highs getting about 45 FPS. So that Ti GPU is definitely helping in the ray tracing department, getting, you know, near the top of the charts here. And then if we turn DLSS on, we are now at the top, and I think maybe that extra VRAM is helping here a little bit. So 78 FPS there, a pretty good result overall. Now Call of Duty Warzone, this is Warzone 1 with max settings, ray tracing on in the Warzone training area. The Blade 15 was getting 113 FPS. Unfortunately, I tested this before Warzone 2 came out, but we're getting pretty middle of the road performance. Again, 113 FPS compared to some of the high wattage 3080s, which are all hitting over 120. So not too far off, but again, it's not going to top the charts here. If we throw DLSS quality on, we're hitting about 143 FPS, which gives a decent boost, but again, a little under some of those high wattage 3080s. And then now in Cyberpunk, we're hitting about 50 FPS in the Ultra preset, the in-game benchmark at QHD, which puts it neck and neck with the Flow X16 with the 3070 Ti. And then on the Ray Tracing Ultra preset with 1440p DLSS auto, it actually moves up to the top here. So I don't know if it's something with DLSS, but it definitely helped out. I think this is probably where the VRAM is coming in handy. So it is moving quite a bit up the charts when you factor in Ray Tracing and DLSS. And then on the high preset, we dropped it down a bit, 63 FPS, again, middle of the road. So Red Dead Redemption 2, the Blade 15 is again tied with the Flow X16 in performance here, hitting 62 FPS. Drop it down to 1080p, and it's still about the same level as the Flow X16. Again, 1 FPS more, so 73 FPS. And then CSGO, it's hitting about 415 FPS here. I think this is where the Intel processor is helping a lot. So it's almost up there with that MSI GE76 with the 11980HK. Drop it down to 1080p, and again, near the top. So I think that Intel 12th gen is really helping there. Overall, a really good result there. Horizon Zero Dawn has a great benchmark. The Blade 15 got 89 FPS here, which is pretty good. Just a little bit ahead of the Flow X16 and a little bit ahead of like the 2021 Blade 17. Drop it down to 1080p, pretty close to the top there, 109 FPS, a little ahead of the 3080 Legion 7, and a pretty good result overall. So overall, the gaming performance here is not bad. It's not the greatest, of course, but again, this is a thin and light laptop, fairly quiet, 16 gigabytes of VRAM, and they do have, of course, a 3070 Ti model that comes pretty close to this one in performance. So, okay, my final thoughts on the Blade 15. It's a great laptop. It looks beautiful, but it's not without flaws. Of course, it's going to be beat out in games by some of the thicker laptops out there with higher wattage GPUs, but where it does win is portability and fan noise. I really like how Razer tuned the fans on this 2022 Blade 15. It gives you great like noise to performance ratio, especially for a chassis this small. So, you know, there's still those little things with the Razer Blade 15 that I wish other laptops would do so we would have some competition, you know, in this CNC aluminum form factor, because unfortunately there's just those little weird things like the edges of the laptop being too sharp and hurting your arms, the paint being very easily chipped, things getting into the speaker grills, you know, just weird little like quality of life things that kind of hold it back a little bit. But again, it is such a unique chassis and there really is nothing like it on the market at this moment. So I still think the 2022 model is a pretty good buy, but again, the Blade 16s are out. They're super expensive, but if you want that ultimate GPU performance and you still want that Blade chassis, that's really your only option. So overall, it's a great laptop. I still prefer the Flow X16 from Asus as like my favorite at this moment, but I don't really have any huge complaints on the Blade 15. Decent in gaming, pretty good CPU, pretty good battery life. Speakers are not great. The display is definitely beaten out by others, but it's still pretty good. With the OLED model definitely having a much better display than this one. You know, Advanced Optimus is really nice to have. Both RAM slots replaceable in a chassis this thin is great. You know, HDMI 2.1, Thunderbolt 4. So all those things are great. But again, it's Razer. You're really paying for the design and the chassis. I mean, you're paying for the name. You're paying for Razer, you know. So all those things come at a cost premium. But hey, I mean, to some of you guys, that's probably worth it. So anyways, thanks so much, guys, for watching this review. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like, subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications when the next video is coming out. I have some other cool ones on the way. I'm definitely going to be buying some of these 2023 laptops as well. Maybe even a Blade 16 or Blade 18. So definitely subscribe to hear more about that. Thanks again, guys.